My name is Shelley Blevins, and I am 53 years old, and this is my testimony that the Lord has given me to share with you. To know that no matter what you go through and no matter what happens to you, that Jesus will always be there. Even if you're angry at Him, even if you cuss at Him, no matter what, Jesus will still be there when you're ready. My granddaughter was born on December 22nd, 2003, to my son, who at the time was 17, and his ex-girlfriend was 16. And it's not what I wanted for my kid. It's hard to have kids, and especially when you're still a teenager and growing up, you have a lot of growing up to do. But we decided that, this is what happened and we're going to deal with it. So Katie was born, and she was beautiful. As soon as I held her, I was in love with her and just couldn't wait to be, the kind of grandma that I know that I could be. I'd been a stay-at-home mom my whole life with both my children, and I was just so excited. And I even, had told both my son Nelson and his ex-girlfriend that if they wanted to, go back to school, graduate high school, go to college, that they could do that, and I would watch Katie and do everything in my power to make sure that they could succeed in their life while Katie was being cared for. And so for the first 9 months of Katie's life, around there, probably closer to 8 months, I went over there every single day to her house and helped Christy, the mom's name is Christy Ernest, take care of her daughter while her mom was at work, because she was only 16, so very young. And but I just wanted to be around my granddaughter. And I had a son at the time, he's 4, so he's a very young uncle. And so anyway, I would help her do that. I bought her things. I was just so excited to be near her. I didn't care if I had to go over there every day, all day and do whatever. I was just happy to be there. And for some reason, they did not, my son's name wasn't on the birth certificate. And during a time where I couldn't get a hold of him for a couple of weeks, I found out that Katie was in the hospital and had RSV, which I was not surprised, because Christy, her mom, her stepdad, everybody in the house smoked. And now I smoke, but I don't smoke in my home, and I don't smoke in my car, and I don't smoke around my kids or my grandkids. So I was a little upset that they didn't notify me and let me know that she had RSV, because I would have happily gone to the hospital and stayed the night, or helped them in whatever way that I could. And now Christy would say that I was very controlling. I wasn't controlling. I wasn't trying to tell her how to raise her daughter. I just wanted to be a part of Katie's life. And so anyway, she stopped accepting my calls. She would say they're busy, or they were going to be going somewhere, and it became evident that they just weren't going to let me or my son Nelson see Katie anymore. And he did go to several of her well baby visits, and they would smoke in the car, and he would ask them not to. He'd get very frustrated that they wouldn't take into consideration anything he had to say. So one day I went up there and I knocked and everything, and then I found out that Chrissy didn't even live in Amarillo anymore. That at some point her parents had gotten her and Katie and taken them to live in Houston with her sister. And I was devastated, because there's my granddaughter and my son, and we couldn't see Katie anymore. It was like, you just don't count. And that wasn't going to work for me. We got an attorney, and I sued for grandparents' rights. In the state of Texas, it's very, very hard to get grandparents' rights. Literally, you have to prove the mother unfit to even get 1 week in a month to see your grandchild. And when we got an attorney, she also got an attorney. And um, basically what happened is I didn't see my granddaughter for um, about 4 years. And in 2008, she came back to Amarillo, and by then she had had another little girl and a little boy. And uh, the father of the little boy was killed in a car accident, and she was with a new guy, and she couldn't get help with her child care like CCMS because she couldn't show that why she wasn't receiving child support for Katie from my son, which is not to say that I have the papers where we tried to uh, set it up for my son to pay child support, but she evaded every citation she was served, and she avoided all, like the judge had said, do mediation, do this and that. She just ignored all of that and just stayed out of Amarillo. And I used up a lot of money, looking for her, but she didn't have a driver's license. She didn't graduate high school. Of course, I didn't have any personal information on her. And so, anyway, back to the present of 2008, she contacted me via MySpace and asked me if I could get in touch with Nelson, and she wanted to meet with him and go through the Attorney General and set up child support payments, and then he would also be able to have joint custody of Katie. And I was so excited. I mean, she didn't know, but I already knew that she had lived in Amarillo or was living in Amarillo. I knew where she worked. I'm by no means a stalker. I just was looking out for the safety of my granddaughter. And so one day I knew where she lived, and I went to her house, and Katie was in there, and she knew I was coming. I just asked if I could see her, and oh my gosh, she was beautiful, beautiful. She looked just like my son. And I didn't want to rock the boat, and have her run off or anything, so I was very polite and kind. And Katie showed me some of her favorite nail polish, and I wasn't, exactly approving of the situation of how she lived, but Katie looked healthy and she looked okay. So, and I didn't know if she remembered me because the last time that I saw her, she was like maybe not even a year old. And I don't know if anybody ever talked to her about me. I know that when she turned a year old and I wasn't able to see her, they wouldn't let me come to her birthday party. And I had bought her a bunch of presents, and I had my friend take them and leave them on their front porch. And I don't know if they told her they were from me or not, but I just loved her. I bonded with her from the minute she was born until the day I couldn't see her anymore. She was just like so important to me. So anyway, I went over to their house, and as I was leaving, Katie ran and literally jumped in my arms, and I was holding my keys and stuff and my phone, and I dropped the keys because I just grabbed her and I hugged her, and I told her that I had missed her and that I loved her, and I was so excited, and that we were going to get to see each other. And all these years I had been buying gifts for her at Christmas, birthday, Easter, stored them in my closet for someday giving them to her. And so anyway, but she kissed me on the cheek, and she whispered in my ear, and she said, "I missed you." And I was like, did she remember me? Was this something that, I don't know, it was just a blessing. And so my son met with her. I filled out all the papers for him for the Attorney General. We had a court date set for September 3rd, 2009. Katie would have received my son's last name, and he would have got joint custody and started child support payments. And on July 6th, I believe, I was delivering some Avon, and I had missed a call on my phone, a voicemail, and I called it back, and it was some lady, and she was saying, I'm with CPS in Vernon, Texas, and I'm trying to get a hold of your son, Nelson. And I was like, Vernon? I don't know anybody in Vernon. And she said, well, I just need to get a hold of your son. And I was like, okay. So I gave her, his number and everything. But then no sooner had I done that than my son was calling me. He was at work, and he was telling me, and he was saying, Mom, there, some lady just called me and told me that Katie's dead and they think Christy did it. And he was rambling on, and I was like, no, son, you misunderstood. I don't know what you're talking about. Just, no, I don't know what you're talking about. But I was driving, and I had my little boy in the back seat, my other son. And so I went home and I called the lady back, and I told her, I said, my son called and told me that you told him that my granddaughter was dead and that her mom killed her. I said, I'm sure you just mean that she's hurt, because first of all, they don't even live in Vernon. And she kept saying, well, ma'am, yes, ma'am, they do live in Vernon, and Katie was killed on July 4th, and Christy is in jail. And I was like, no, Katie's hurt and she's in the hospital, and we will be right there. We'll drive there and we'll be there, and we'll take care of her until she gets better, and then we'll bring her home. And she said, no, ma'am, no, she's dead. And it's not the lady's fault, but I was screaming at her, and I was telling her that she was a liar, and I was rude and hateful to her. And I was like, I haven't heard anything like that on the news. I haven't heard anything from anybody to indicate that this is true. So, but then, like a day later, Christy's sister called me and said, I have some really bad news to tell you. And I was like, yeah, I already know. But, thanks for waiting 4 days to think it was important to tell the father and the grandmother that Katie is dead. And I alerted the news here. I called the Globe News. I called all the news stations, and they got with the people in Vernon, and it was all over the news. And her family was very angry at me because Christy is from here. She went to Caprock, and they didn't want anybody in Amarillo to know what had happened. And I didn't care. Katie was born here. My son was born here. And people had a right to know, what had happened. And what had happened is that Katie was beaten to death. And I'm not going to go into great detail about her death. Basically, Christy's boyfriend, Tommy Castro, who at the time was 42 years old, I believe, and she's 22, he thought she had peed in his car there in Vernon, and she said she did not, and he said she did. So he beat her. He beat her with a little wooden boat that she had made in Awanas. He pulled her off of her bed. He pounded on her stomach. He stepped on her with his full weight with he was wearing boots, and then turned around to step on her again, and she had turned to the side and said, no, I can't take it anymore. This little girl is 5 years old, and she was not crying. You cannot tell me that Jesus did not have his arms wrapped around that little girl. And her mother just stood there. She said she turned away at the end because she couldn't watch anymore. She didn't think to run out of the apartment building screaming that, he's hurting her daughter. Run and get a knife and stab it. Do something. She did nothing. And in court, she testified that she couldn't because she was drugged up. But yet after the beating, she was able to take her little boy and take him to the potty, and then go into the kitchen and start lunch. Well, if you can do all that, you could have intervened and saved your little girl. Katie suffered massive abrasions to her liver, and her spleen was actually ruptured in half, and it took her all day to suffocate on her own blood. And around 10:30, 10:45, she died in the bathtub. And they took her into the hospital and told her that while Chrissy was making dinner that she drowned. And Katie was only in a little pair of boxers, and the ER nurses and everybody could tell that they try to get water. There was no water in her lungs when they intubated her. And they tried on her. To me, she died July 4th. They tried on her so hard to get her to come back to life that they called it at 12:01 July 5th. But Katie died on July 4th. And Tommy Castro was responsible. And yes, Christy did admit at first that she did it and that she was scared and a victim of Tommy Castro, and that may well be. She was a victim. But her first priority in life was to protect her children, and she did not do that. She's not a victim to me. She had plenty of opportunities to save her daughter, and she did not. And I went to the both trials. Of course, Christy pled guilty and didn't have a trial. Tommy Castro's trial lasted 9 days, and he got life in prison, which he's eligible for parole after 30 years, and she received the maximum sentence of 18 years. And her family hates me for that, because my victim impact statement moved the judge to give her the maximum, because he could have given her 2 years, and she'd already been in jail for 2 years, and it would have been time served, and that's what her family was hoping for. And it's not that I feel like you should be accountable for what you do or do not do. And I was very angry at God. I cursed at God. I didn't pray for 2 years. I didn't want to talk to God. Because in all the time that I didn't get to see Katie for 4 years, I prayed for her every single day. And I asked God to protect her, and I asked God to help her and to keep her safe, and that people were around her that loved her and let her know who Jesus was, and just let her know, because her daddy didn't even get to know her at all. He didn't even get to see her that one last time like I did. And the next time I saw her after that November day in 2008, the next time I saw her, she was in a coffin in a little white dress and band-aids on her head because they couldn't cover up all the bruises. And literally for 37 days that they lived in Vernon, Texas, Katie was beaten and starved, slapped, and abused in ways that no child should ever be abused in. And the mother did nothing in any of those 37 days for either one of the children. And Katie was literally covered from head to toe. She had blunt force trauma to the head, blunt force trauma to the stomach, the buttocks, the legs, the arms, the liver. I mean, I don't understand how somebody can do that. And then when I read stories and stuff, and I can empathize with other people, but it's hard to believe that it happened to me. And I lost a lot of friends after Katie was murdered. It was like people thought if they were my friend or that was really painful for me, because I needed a lot of support. I didn't have anybody when Katie died. I didn't have people bring me. I did have a few friends that brought some food, but I didn't have anybody come and visit and bring meals and all that. And yes, I don't belong to a church group, but that doesn't matter. That shouldn't matter. Katie was a little girl that was beaten to death. And that's I thought that was just the hardest thing. I even told myself that, well, nothing really bad's ever going to happen to me again, because this is the worst thing that could ever happen. This is not something that people go through, and nobody I know had ever been through anything like that. So I told God, this is probably the worst thing that's ever going to happen to me, but it wasn't. My son it was very hard for him. He had already had a room ready at his house, and he was excited because he was going to get to finally be a dad and everything. And he did self-medicate after Katie was murdered for about 2 years, and then he started seeing a psychiatrist, and he started getting his life together. And then he met another young lady, and they got engaged, and she got pregnant, and he was have another little girl. And I was just so excited, because it was like, a girl, he's gonna have a girl. God is blessing him, and he was doing good. He worked for the city, and he was getting his life together. And And, I did forget to mention that I did 3.5 years of counseling after Katie was murdered. And I'm so very, very thankful for that. Someone stepped forward and counseled me. My counselor is a wonderful Christian woman who helped me work through a lot of demons and stuff in my past, and prepared me for going to trial, because I don't think I could have gone through that trial without that counseling. But anyway, we had a cookout, and it was Saturday, and my son left and decided to go hang out with some of his friends. And on April 28th, 2013, it's 5 days after my birthday, which is April 23rd, he was with some friends in in one boy's room, and they were hanging out, and one of his friends that he'd been friends with since middle school had been drinking quite a bit, and he mishandled my son's shotgun, and he shot my son on the right side of his face and killed him. I wasn't there when my granddaughter was being murdered, and I wasn't there when my son was dying on the floor. And those are really, really hard things to know that. I know that he knew that I loved him, and I know that he loved me, but I wasn't there to save Katie. I wasn't there when she was crying, but I know that Jesus was there, because Katie couldn't have suffered all those things and not been just screaming in pain, and she wasn't. But I hope she didn't think, well, where's that lady that said I'm going to see you and everything's going to be okay? Because everything wasn't okay. And I wasn't there for my son. And I just don't. And I was angry. I screamed and yelled at God. I was so angry at God, because how could he do that? How could he let my son die? And I still don't know. I don't know the reason why my son had to die, because there's a lot of people that suffer great things and they don't die. And I don't, Katie, I did a Katie's Run for Child Abuse. I shared her story with a London magazine. I did my testimony at Bridges to Life, which is a Christian ministry for prisoners, and I went and shared my story with about 120 hardened criminals. And, it was very hard for me emotionally to sit there, and that's why I'm doing the video. But I just hope it helps someone to know that there is life after you lose a grandchild, and there is life after you lose a child, even though it is incredibly hard, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I don't belong in a church. I still don't go to church, but I am a strong believer in Jesus Christ and prayer. I pray every day, and it's only through my relationship with him that I'm doing this video. Because even in 2011, I was diagnosed with a very rare liver disease, and I almost died, but all the stuff fell into place, and I was able to get an appointment with the doctor the next day, be diagnosed, and literally saved, because my organs were failing. And I didn't even know shortly after Katie's trial, or Tommy Castro's trial for Katie. And, I just thought I was tired and stressed out. I didn't know I was like dying, literally. And, but, we always hope to keep our kids safe, and we want to do everything to keep them safe. And and for our grandkids, and it's like, I didn't, and I had a lot of guilt for a long time. And I just have to know that it wasn't my fault, but I still, every day, if I would have done this, if I would have done that, those thoughts still go through my head. And there's so many people that have lost their children, and there's so many groups out there on Facebook where they've lost their children to suicide, accidents, drunk drivers, murder, whatever. And it's so hard to read their stories because the healing is so hard. It has been 6 years since my son Nelson was killed, and he did have a little girl, and she looks just like him, and her and Katie look just alike. And that was God's blessing to me, and I know that. But it's still incredibly hard. I mean, she misses a daddy that she never even knew. She misses not even knowing him, and if I could give that to her, I would. But I just want people to know that even if you're angry at God, and even if you don't understand what happened, if you just lean on Jesus Christ, if you just believe that He will sustain you and He will keep you every step of the way, He will. And you can go away from Him if that happens for you. If it doesn't, but if you do, He's still there, because He's there for me every single day. Every single day I get up and I live and I laugh. I have laughed and I have joy in my life. And I never thought I would ever have joy in my life again. But you too can have joy. Thank y'all for listening.